Okay, now that we're live, good afternoon and welcome to the latest edition of the Sports Management Club at IUPUI's virtual speaker series. Today, joining us is Charley Frank. He's the executive director of the Cincinnati Reds Community Fund, and I'm looking forward to talking to him a little bit about fundraising, philanthropy, and kind of just his path to that career, I suppose. So, Charley, I'm going to get started by kind of having you introduce yourself a little bit. Tell us about your job a little bit, and then we'll get into some more.
Well, Jeffrey, thank you. Really looking forward to this visit with the IUPUI Sports Management Club. So I appreciate the invite. I am in my, this will be my 18th season with the Cincinnati Reds. In this capacity as the executive director of the Community Fund, which has certainly grown in stature as we've built our Urban Youth Academy, which is where I'm calling in from today. And, you know, as the baseball industry really faces a bit of a crossroads in terms of finding that next generation of fans, with an average viewership of median age of about, 55 years old, for nationally televised games, there's a real crisis in our industry about finding that next audience and teaching them the game. And there's been a real challenge in terms of finding an urban audience, and that's really what we're all about. All my years here. So, and the tenure with the Reds has been exciting too, as I'm a member of the leadership team and have had exposure to a lot of some of the bigger decisions that have gone on with the franchise, especially since the Castellinis purchased the team back in 2006. So it's been an incredibly exciting ride, and it's been quite a challenge, as it has been for so many businesses since last March. But really looking forward to getting into kind of some of the nuts and bolts and some of my past. I'm Cincinnati native, also had a career in the NBA. And my first job out of college was working in Boston on the Boston Celtics radio network, and then spent about a decade working with the Minnesota Timberwolves in Minneapolis, St. Paul, before returning here to Cincinnati. So always enjoy talking about the journey, since I know a lot of you are about to embark on it at the college level right now.
Tell us a little bit, Charley, about what it kind of, well, first off, let's go into your background. So you went to school, I'm assuming somewhere near Cincinnati?
I did. I attended Northwestern University in Chicago, which is a school I could never get into today. As I found out through my son's journey, he's a freshman this year at Rhodes College in Memphis. I went to school locally here in high school in Cincinnati, and then spent 4 years living in Evanston, Illinois, just north of Chicago.
You moved on to the Boston Celtics. What led you to that, I guess, position? Internships? How did you get up to Boston from Evanston?
Yeah, great question. 100% internship. So I had some family living in Boston and really enjoyed that area, and decided I was gonna, live with my brother for a little while and try to find an internship. So I had some friends that checked out some job fairs, and I was a radio, TV, film major in the School of Communications at Northwestern, and my number one extracurricular from the time I arrived on campus to the time I left was working for the student radio station. So I knew for a long time that I wanted to be in the journalism side and the radio TV side initially, and so I had an opportunity through a job fair at WRKO in Boston, which at the time was the flagship station of the Celtics and an affiliate for the Red Sox. It happened to be right across the street also from Fenway Park. So it was a really neat experience. I was able to stay an extra month, made some great contacts there. And when the Celtics would come through Chicago to play the Bulls, which they did a handful of times, and also in the playoffs that year, I was invited to help them with the broadcast from Old Chicago Stadium. And when they moved frequencies from WRKO to WEEI, right as I was graduating, they needed a lot of cheap help. And they offered me the opportunity to be part of that cheap help. And, throughout my college experience, I really wanted to be on air. That was sort of my goal, was to be an on-air broadcaster. And some of those opportunities that I had were in much smaller markets. And when the opportunity to move into production in a really dynamic market like Boston presented itself, I said yes to that opportunity and really have never looked back.
So you spent time up there in Boston. Let's tell a little bit about what you did there. The attendees here may not be into the radio, TV broadcasting industry, more geared towards sport management. But let's talk a little bit about what you did and what does it mean that you were doing production in radio.
So, among other things, there was a 2-hour talk show every night from 6 to 8 p.m. because I arrived literally just as the Celtics were coming off a championship season. So, the Celtics season was quiet. So, the primary duties were working with the staff, and they had a number of prominent local journalists, 2 or 3 of whom per night would be a part of this 2-hour talk show. And depending on, what the Red Sox schedule was. So, some nights I would be dispatched over to Fenway Park with a cell phone to get people to call into the show. Whether it was Red Sox players or visitors. Other times I would be in studio, maybe writing some of the copy for the open of the show, communicating with some of the writers, people like Charles Pierce and Bob Ryan, that are still on the national stage. And then also had some duties as the summer went on, building some of the network elements for that coming season's, Boston Celtics broadcasts. So, but more than anything else, more than the specifics, I think where I was able to maybe get a leg up on some of the other interns that year was just, the ability to communicate, to take responsibility, to follow through, whether it's sports management, whether it's business, whether it's broadcasting, journalism. At the end of the day, I think the internships are still the number one gateway, to open a door into a tough industry like sports and entertainment. It's hard to get a full-time job. That's true. It's nowhere near as hard to get an internship, which I learned. And what I tell people all the time that come through the Reds when I have the chance to speak to one of the young internship teams or classes at the ballpark is to let them know you've done the hard part. You got your foot in the door, and it's what you make of it. We had a terrific IUPUI student, Emily Egbers, who interned with us for a couple of years and, who we hired full time before she had even graduated. And she aced the test. I mean, she proved herself mature, responsible, accountable, self-sufficient. She jumped in, she learned the language, and she, not intentionally, but made herself indispensable because she had, the right balance of confidence and competence and people skills and emotional IQ. I mean, I'm sure she would tell you that she was a lot more mature at the end of that stay than she was at the start, but she did a great job and earned herself an opportunity. I'd like to think that's sort of the position I put myself, in with WRKO way back when in Boston, was they realized, okay, well, here's someone who still has a lot to learn, but he seems to get along with people. He seems to know what he's doing. He's hopefully not too bad to have around. And, he picked up on our language quickly. It's a lot easier to bring in someone who he kind of knows the system than going outside and getting someone cold. So, that's what that experience taught me, not just, on my own professional path, but also as I'm now in a role and have been for some years to hire and to recruit, full-time staff and seasonal staff. That's what you're looking for.
You just mentioned a few things, and it branches me into a question for you. And that's, you mentioned a few skills, and one of them being emotional IQ. What do you mean when you talk about that? Because I don't think in the academic side, we talk about that enough with our students. I think they do in certain areas, but I don't think that faculty share that enough with students. Could you expand on that a little bit about what you meant there?
Jeffrey, that's a great question. I don't know that I've really ever been asked that before. And it's such a nuanced element, and a lot of it is probably more psychological and more personal history, that makes us who we are. What type of individual, what do they need to have experienced that's going to allow them, in the moment of earning an internship? Because, all you have to do is hustle to get the internship. and maybe have a phone interview or an in-person interview. But that's really when the clock starts ticking. What are you able to do? I've had plenty of good resumes and people that look great on the surface that, haven't lived up to the expectation that I might have had for them. And I've had others that I thought, well, these individuals, I hope they work out. They seem quiet, or they seem a little bit detached, that have excelled. I think so much of it ultimately comes down to common sense and common courtesy and maturity. And you know what? I think back to myself as a college junior, especially compared to my son right now, who's a college freshman. He's so much more mature than I ever was in college, but I guess I was able to fake it well enough. It's showing interest in other people. I think one of the key elements is you are listening and learning more than you're talking. I think, so often, people that are fresh out of school, and I'm sure I was this way too, after my junior year, you're so eager to talk about your own experience, so eager to talk about what it is you're doing in school, so eager to talk about your unique story. You've got to have the common sense in that setting, to resist that urge unless asked. And you really have to listen and learn. Asking people questions about themselves, asking, the new colleagues, more and more about the culture of wherever it is that you're working or interning, seems like common sense. It's amazing how rare it is. So, part of that is it's a baseline of maturity and an ability to get along with people. But, beyond that baseline, it's knowing when to talk and when not to. It's being respectful. It's truly being able to listen and learn.
So what you were just talking about is a combination of soft skills. Now, before I move forward, I guess you could say, I want to kind of hang on this for a minute. And soft skills versus hard skills. You're in a unique spot with the Cincinnati Reds where you've got to have a unique combination of soft skills and hard skills. So what types of hard skills would you say that you expect out of students, whether they be interns, full-time, it doesn't matter. The hard set of skills, and I don't know how in your industry, how you classify that, but mine would be, I don't know, being able to type, something of that nature. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Clearly these days, you have to be able to multitask. You have to be able to concentrate on more projects at once, certainly than I was accustomed to when I was going through school. But, beyond that, you've got to, like you said, it sounds funny, but you've got to be, proficient in terms of your ability to type and to transcribe. You've got to be able to write a cohesive email. You've got to know the difference between, what's appropriate in text communication, what's appropriate in written communication, email or otherwise, what's appropriate in verbal and oral communication. That to me is probably the key. I feel like I can teach or find people to help me teach or coach around virtually anything else. Is it learning Excel? Is it, learning Adobe? Is it, whatever the software package might be? People can learn that. People can be taught that. I think a hard skill, the basic skill is, are you really a proficient, typist? And are you somebody who can write? That is such an important skill. And that's really two different elements to it. Number one is, do you have the experience in how to put content together? Have you been exposed to either a class or a set of classes or a mentor, a teacher, somebody that really has challenged you to think about how should an email read? How casual should it be? How quickly do you need to get to the emphasis? What's the difference between, a 3 or 4 sentence email as opposed to writing too much? The content and how you package it is so critical. And again, people are paying attention, whether they realize it or not. There needs to be more formality in how you are typing out an email as opposed to how you text. And you have to also be nimble. I'm at a point now where I've been in the business long enough for the majority of people that, are part of the staff that I oversee are probably half my age or maybe 15, 20 years younger. Not just the millennial stereotype, but, I'm going to want to communicate differently with younger members of the staff, probably similar to how I would, with my 18-year-old son, 16-year-old daughter, compared to how I might communicate via text, to somebody on the executive team of the Reds or with Major League Baseball, and that's such a subtle thing. So I think in there, Jeffrey, lives both hard skills and soft skills. The hard skills being, do you know how to write? Do you know how to type? Do you know how to communicate? The soft skill there goes back to judgment and common sense and taking the time to really be thoughtful, slow things down enough so you're not just racing to get something done. If you get a text from a professor or from a dean or from a boss, or from somebody in, position of authority, are you going to be racing to make sure you answer them promptly and to turn it around quickly to make that impression? Or are you going to pause and really give it the proper amount of time and thought to make sure that, you're not overthinking it necessarily, but that it's an appropriate response?
So the funny thing about that is there's a recent assignment that's been created that we've been using that is teaching students how to send an email to a professor. So the irony is this is exactly explained by you. So let's segue for a moment. And I want to remind everybody that's in attendance that drop your questions in the chat. Anything you could think of. Charlie's here to answer your questions. So also same thing on YouTube. Drop your questions in the chat. We will answer. We will do our moderator session here in a few moments. So you shifted gears to the Minnesota Timberwolves. So you go from Boston to Minneapolis. First off, the weather didn't change all that much, I don't think, but the role changed. You became a vice president for communications. How do you make that jump from getting that foot in the door and then climbing the ladder? And I don't see what's in between there, but there may have been some things that helped you get to that point.
Yeah, it's been different in Cincinnati because I've been in the same role, although I've taken on a lot more responsibility. So, sometimes I marvel at the fact that I've been able to crack the code not once but twice in this industry. Because when my wife and I moved back home to Cincinnati, I had some help, but ultimately, had to reinvent myself in a different market, which is how I wound up then working on the nonprofit side, which I'm grateful for. I love the different flavors and the different chapters, but I really came from a broadcast background. So, I went from being an intern in Boston and then, being a very entry-level, junior-level radio producer. But, the gentleman who brought me over, who remains one of my closest friends to this day, my first boss in Boston has been, a broadcast VP in the NBA, going on 25 years, maybe even more. So, I ended up being the junior producer. There were two producers of Celtics basketball, being the junior one. But then, I met other people at the radio station and was able to branch out a little bit. And the opportunity with the Timberwolves came because I was asked by another one of the on-air staff at WEEI to help him produce his weekly NFL show. So I took that on, very little, if any, money, but it was a great experience. And I was mostly doing general sports talk and NBA work. So this was a chance to get some exposure to the NFL. And, each week, the home radio announcer for those week's slates of games would file a report. So one of the young announcers for the Kansas City Chiefs at the time was Kevin Harlan. Kevin now, of course, my gosh, he's on the Chunky commercial. He's the voice of EA Sports. He's Fanatics and Turner and, all the great work that he does at the national level on radio and TV. Kevin he and I were both, young in the field, he on the air, me behind the scenes. He was established and he accepted the job as the play-by-play for radio and TV of the Timberwolves and needed somebody young to move up there who could move quickly and take on a broadcast manager role, primarily to build the radio network. So I remember flying up there to meet Kevin and some of the staff, and I accepted the job that day, and I lived in Minneapolis 2 weeks later. So, and I didn't know Kevin well, but had worked with him for part of a year, and we struck up a, nice little professional, relationship, and, but very modest. I talked to him maybe a few times a fall, but all of a sudden he was looking for someone that, could jump in and take on a lot of responsibility. And he was smart enough to realize that I was young and unattached and could probably move quickly. And, so it's a reminder that there is an incredible amount of luck needed to get from point A to point B. But I think, I'd like to think that I definitely played a role in putting myself in a position where I could be lucky. If I had just done what I was hired to do, which was produce the Celtics and produce a nightly talk show, and hadn't strayed beyond that, then my life trajectory would have been decidedly different. But that came along with building a relationship with this guy at WEEI in Boston, who had this show that he liked to, this NFL show. And so I built up a relationship with him, even though he wasn't in my day-to-day interaction. It just, that was something that I did because I, wanted to meet everyone at the station and get a sense for who everyone was, and make myself available to, to help out beyond my job description. And that opened a door that I was able to walk through. And when I got to Minnesota, I had a resume that suggested I should have been able to do all that work. Well, I was the junior producer. So a lot of the elements in building a radio network, building, all the sponsor relationships, building all the infrastructure, I was faking that and scared to death. But you know what? It was the experience of a lifetime, and everything with the Timberwolves at that time was new. And I worked with people who not only allowed mistakes, but encouraged me to make them. And so I got lucky, and, clearly was able to find and harness my skill set, because I think I got lucky. I think I am a better writer, producer, coordinator type than I probably would have been on air, and it allowed me to all of a sudden make 2 jumps within 3 years, from Boston to Minneapolis. And my boss in Minneapolis left for a job with the Houston Rockets within, 3 months of when I left. And I went from being a young broadcast manager to being the director of broadcasting when I was, in my mid-20s. And, being one of the younger executives with the team and traveling to league meetings. And 5 years in, there was an ownership change, and they offered me a position as first the director of communications, and then within a year, when things were going well, made me a vice president. So my last 5 years there, and I remember, Jeffrey, there was a time early on in my Minnesota tenure where I reported up to the director of corporate sales, because at that time I was still on the broadcast side. And we were on the Timberwolves caravan driving around Fargo or Grand Forks, North Dakota, somewhere way out in the boonies. And I remember he said to me, "Where do you want to be in 5 years in terms of your career?" I said, "I don't know." And he said, "That's the wrong answer. That's the wrong answer. If you don't know where you want to go, you'll never get there." I said, "Well, I had no idea that I'd be sitting on a mobile home with you, driving from Alexandria, Minnesota to Grand Forks, North Dakota 5 years ago either." And I said, "I'm not like you. I'm not the driven sales guy. I'm more of the storytelling, production guy, and the network builder guy. So I appreciate what you're saying, but I'm comfortable kind of letting my path unfold, because I think I have enough, I have my antenna up, and I think I have the skill set to be able to know when that next opportunity arrives and how to react." So, and his name is Len Komorowski. He's been the president of the Cleveland Cavaliers and in their arena and the lumber, the high. So his method has really worked well for him. He spent some time with the Philadelphia Eagles before he, settled in Cleveland, and has had a great career there. So I see why that method worked for him. I don't know if he'd ever remember that conversation, and I don't know if he would agree too, but I think knowing at that time that, my method's a little different, but it works for me, and it got me from, point A to point B numerous times along the way.
Man, that's quite the Grand Forks, North Dakota was what I took from that, the trip to Grand Forks, North Dakota, right?
A lot of driving around the upper Midwest. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sure that was fun, especially during basketball season. So you've now transitioned from the broadcasting world into VP of communications, and the job it goes from being focused on the quality and content and sponsorship relations with the broadcasting to multitasking. You spoke on multitasking earlier. Tell us a little bit about that role and the level of multitasking that was involved there.
So when I was promoted, I went from being the broadcast director to being the communications VP. And at that time, the organization only had four, maybe five vice presidents. So it was a small circle, and I was definitely the youngest member of it. So, I certainly, was humbled numerous times along the way. And what was tricky about it was all of a sudden I was, responsible for managing and reviewing and directing a group of peers that I had. That was, I consider myself pretty good on my feet, and if not mature all the time, at least able to fake it. That was a real tough one. Maybe one of the hardest adjustments that I've had to make professionally, because we had a really strong culture up there, really inclusive social culture. So all of a sudden going from peer to direct report was tricky. And then also had to fake it. All of a sudden I was responsible for our community, our advertising manager, for our creative and graphics departments, for our foundation and community relations and public relations. So it was really all the messaging side with the Timberwolves, and then the WNBA Lynx as they came to life. That took time. That was probably, one of the biggest leaps that I've made in my career. And, some of it went well, and some of it was exceedingly difficult. But, I think at the end of the day, again, those soft skills, I'm a big believer, whether it's professionally, personally, that so much success hinges on one's ability to own their blind spots. It's so important that we recognize them. It's so important that we're able to disarm others about them, and to laugh at them. The more human we come across, whether, we're in over our heads or, whether we're, really dug in or emotional on a topic, I think people are going to forgive you for mistakes if you acknowledge that, that you're struggling, if you acknowledge that maybe you didn't make the right call, if you can acknowledge that maybe you didn't handle the situation the right way, and if you know how to ask for help. So, I knew broadcasting then. That was my area of expertise. One of the hardest parts of that was that, a colleague of mine who I'd worked alongside for 5 or 6 years got promoted to the manager, and and he and I both at that time were responsible for being in the TV truck, and he wanted a little more rope, and I still wanted things done a certain way, and I thought that was going to be one of the easier transitions because that was an area where I was more familiar. That was one of the harder ones. I loved getting to learn the PR business more. I loved getting to know the community relations and foundation part more. And by that time, I think I'd built up enough equity with the organization and the ownership and the leadership, that they gave me space to kind of grow into those roles, knowing that I would raise my hand and admit when there was something that I didn't know. And I think they trusted my common sense and judgment that I wouldn't be making unilateral decisions where they weren't appropriate. And that's another soft skill, Jeffrey, that is underrated. It's, knowing when to communicate up and down the ladder, and knowing when it's okay to make a decision, efficiently, with, and that's one of those soft skills that just takes experience. But I look back at my years in the industry, and those, that first year growing into managing, a lot of those peers, that's something I look back on. That was a big one.
So you're in your 20s and you're managing people as a VP at a NBA team. I couldn't have even dreamed of that in my 20s.
We had a community relations manager who was in his early 70s. And that was, I mean, he looked at me. I'd just come and sit in his office and talk to him about some of these big ideas. And, we were, doing a Minneapolis Lakers jersey retirement and all these things I wanted to do. And thank goodness he was such a kind and decent guy, because he thought I was insane. I mean, he thought I came in. And I remember a few times just in the broadcast realm, I'd go to league meetings and I'd be talking about all this stuff that we're doing and all these pregame. And some of the older broadcasters, very subtly would basically tell me, okay, buddy, pump the brakes, settle down. Okay, you could tell you're really interested in what you're doing in Minnesota. We're just the LA Clippers. Let us be the LA Clippers. So it's a lot of, I making it sound like I've been able to read all these tea leaves along the way. And that has been a part of, I think what's helped me advance and to sustain the career. But trust me, there have been many times, and to this day, where I still talk too much, listen too little, and don't stay as humble as I should.
Well, this is a place where we don't want you to do any of that. We want you to talk as much as possible and don't be humble, right? No, I'm just totally kidding. So now we get to I guess you could call it the present, or the last 18 years as you put out, right? So you moved to Cincinnati. You're back home. You're back in Cincinnati, and you make your way into an executive director job. Talk a little bit about that process of getting back to Cincinnati and the difference between Major League Baseball and the National Basketball Association.
Yeah, it was a really hard period. My wife's a veterinarian, and when we agreed that we were going to move home because we each had a parent whose health was failing, and she had a great job working at the University of Minnesota, we thought we were entrenched in upper Midwest, maybe forever. I mean, we loved it up there, other than the winters, of course. But so when we got home, we said, okay, well, the first one of us that really finds a good job, we'll both take the lead. Well, she's a vet. It took her about 7 minutes. It was crazy. Taking a resume from the Twin Cities and moving it to Cincinnati, it did not help much. I mean, Kevin Harlan was working for CBS, and his partner at the time was the recently departed Sam Weish. So he had Sam Weish reach out to the Bengals and literally scheduled a meeting for me with Mike Brown, the owner of the Bengals. And Mike Brown met with me and had lunch for 2 hours. He could not have been more gracious, but he didn't have anything to offer. I had a friend that knew Rob Butcher, who's still the PR director from the Reds, and Rob Butcher introduced me to John Allen. That didn't mean John Allen had anything. So I had to really pretty much go back to zero. I did some consulting work, and then the boss that had hired me for my internship in Boston, who was established at the NBA, he hired me on to do some part-time production work. So for 2 years, I was traveling and doing some work in the NBA. It literally took me that long to really find my niche back home, and that was a very, that was a very unsettling time professionally. It was a wonderful time family-wise because we were back home and with our parents, before they passed, and when our son was born and all this great stuff. But professionally, I felt like I was on this fabulous trajectory in Minnesota, and then I basically had to wipe that away and start over. And the position that ultimately became available when the Reds hired for the community fund didn't have a full-time person before they built their job description, and I applied for it in 2004. And it was, it wasn't entry level, but at that time, the community fund was a fledgling operation. It was really not even a sidecar to the Reds. It was more of the redheaded stepchild, and it took a lot of hard work and a lot of time, to build up, my credentials inside the organization, to build trust with departments. I think initially it was looked at as being this entity that was trying to get into the inner circle. That was sort of the culture at the time. And fortunately for me, 2 years later, when the Castellinis bought the team, they looked at it 180 degrees the opposite way. They had been involved with the St. Louis Cardinals as limited partners for 10 years, and they were very familiar with the Cardinals 501c3 and how essential it was, to establishing and growing and sustaining the Cardinals' footprint throughout their region. So they didn't see this as something that they had to do to basically, thank taxpayers for helping build a stadium. They saw this as a very strategic sidecar. And that and the work that our board did and that myself and our young staff did to really build up the community fund has changed dramatically. I mean, I think to where we were in the standing of a lot of the employees that are still there back then. And I recall that they looked at us or looked at me skeptically. There was only so much bandwidth. And why did we had a community relations manager at the time, and she was very entrenched in the clubhouse. And, what did the foundation really need to do? So I think there were a lot of people from my NBA days who saw a nice lofty title and a VP title, during my time in Minnesota, and look at, I've been an executive director for the community fund now for all these years. And understandably, I've heard secondhand that some people think, oh, well, that, maybe you kind of slowed things down and took a bit of an easier path just to be back home. And on paper, it does look that way, but I can tell you that, I probably feel more engaged and busier today than I ever did, managing a half a dozen departments in Minnesota. And it just seems to be a great fit for where I am at this stage in my life, because, I love this community. My family has been here for generations. I come from a very, very passionate Reds family, and, living in my hometown, representing, this iconic team, that is so historic in baseball and so important to the fabric of, this region, and being able to be out in front, from a community standpoint and do the community building, it's just phenomenal. So, but it's taken a lot of hard work, and it's taken a lot of the same soft skills to build this up. And, it probably means even more based on the fact that, when I arrived in Minnesota, I just got on the, I got on the spaceship. That thing was already climbing when I jumped on. I was one of the last ones on before that first season, but, there was so much young talent there. And I because of my age and interests and, because of my 2 years in Boston, I think they thought I was this, clairvoyant. Oh my gosh, it's the guy from the Celtics. Not that I'd worked in their front office, so I was able to fake that and get some mileage out of that. But, there I just kind of got on the rocket ship as it was launching. And, it didn't stay up there for that long before the Timberwolves crashed back down and had to build back up when they drafted Kevin Garnett, Stephon Marbury, and Kevin McHale came home, and then kind of had, some ups and downs during those years. Cincinnati was, not only was the community fund something relatively new, but it already had a reputation internally that it felt like it was again, it was a bit of an add-on. And Phil Castellini, who's, my boss now, the president and COO of the Reds, has been known to say on occasion, before we got here, Charlie, you and the community fund were tolerated. Now you're celebrated and promoted. I'm like, yeah, okay. I guess I was tolerated. So, yeah, it's been, but as I look back on it now over all these years, it's been a really worthwhile journey to get here.
So explain a little bit, now that we've gotten, a little bit about you and your path to where you are now. Explain a little bit about what exactly is the Cincinnati Reds Community Fund, and what is the role it plays in the city?
So, we are one of two, actually, nonprofit arms of the Reds. The Reds also operate a best-in-class Hall of Fame and museum that's also a 501c3 public charity. So, but the community fund, I think, compared to other nonprofit arms in sports, we're a little bit different in that, we're not trying to be an inch deep, mile wide. We're really very, very intentional when it comes to growing the game, which was kind of a neat niche when we started. And now it is a necessity that is recognized at the commissioner's level on down. There is tremendous concern, as I referenced at the top, about the lack of young fans, the lack of kids playing baseball and softball compared to a generation or two ago. So, we have a community relations department of 2 people that manage, all the league community efforts, whether it's, the Breast Cancer Awareness Day, Prostate Cancer, Roberto Clemente Day, Jackie Robinson Day, the 2 dozen MLB initiatives that every team executes at a local level. Our community relations department also handles like the fundraising done through the players' spouses and, but we are the community fund. We are totally dug in on youth baseball and softball. So, we have about a half a dozen programs. Our biggest undertaking was raising $8 million to build this beautiful, state-of-the-art urban youth academy. And, it operates, 365 days a year, has over 2,500 card-carrying members, anywhere, we serve kids ages 4 to 18. And we're all about baseball, softball, and education. So, we also, for all the kids that take part in our programs, they have the ability to tap into free tutoring and everything from, ACT prep to, college finance seminars to, college recruiting to resume writing to letter writing. I mean, we really offer a large variety of programs. Our goal is to help kids, use baseball and softball as a way to get into college. And of course, we love it when some of our players sign contracts or earn scholarships to play in college. We had 16 young men and women that came through the program last year that signed letters of intent to play collegiate baseball and softball. One of them, was a Division I school. The rest of them were Division II, Division III, some NAIA, some junior college. Our goal is just to get them in the right spot, whatever that means. But we also, we operate a program for kindergarten through 5th graders to introduce them to the game. We operate that in schools and at rec centers. Our goal there is to get kids from that program onto teams. We help fund over 600 youth baseball and softball teams regionally on an annual basis. We've renovated over 400 baseball fields, whether they're the beautiful fields here at our academy or whether it's just, providing dirt and a backstop to a neighborhood ball field. We've built relationships all throughout the region, with educators, with recreation departments. So, after a period of time, the dust has settled and we really have a lot of value to the Reds because we have a lot of connections when it comes to community building, when it comes to relationship building, when it comes to ticket sales, when it comes to finding the next wave of players and coaches and baseball and softball families. All of a sudden we're uniquely situated. And even though we try to do our work, building the Reds brand, we also put the community fund logo up with the Reds logo on all the fields that we're a part of either renovating or maintaining. And a lot of people, that may be their most logical touch point with us locally. Oh my gosh, I've played on some of your fields. My kids, attended an event, at your academy. My next door neighbor is, coaches high school softball, and, he and his wife attended one of your coaching clinics with Eric Davis and Dimitri Young and, David Bell. So, we are a lot of the currency for the Reds right now. Someone mentioned to me today that, compared to other pro teams, that we've really built this layer of the Reds organization that makes it easier for them to endure the ups and downs of being a small market team in an industry with a bad economic model. God bless the Tampa Bay Rays and how they have figured out a way to stay relevant almost every year. They're the ones that really have broken the cycle of, the Pirates, the Brewers, the Royals, the Reds, the Orioles, on and on and on and on. even the Astros. I mean, the Astros are in one of the 5 largest markets in the U.S., and they've had sustained success. You forget they had 5 straight years where they averaged 100 losses or more. Typically for most teams, you're going up and down. When you're up, well, the winning is what will sustain you and help sales and allow people to feel good about being connected. And when you go through those lulls, which again, even for the Tampas, are inevitable, you have to build authentic relationships. You have to matter, not just to the people in your community, but the people throughout your region. If you're a team like the Reds or the Twins or the Royals, or the Red Sox, and of course they print money, so it's a little different for them now. Because a lot of that, I say that, and it's true, they've been incredibly successful. That's no accident either. I mean, they've built that model. They've taken on other sports marketing in New England. They've completely rebuilt and reimagined Fenway Park, which is not easy to do with a 100-year-old stadium. So, they say they print money. They've earned every penny. But in the smaller markets, it's a tough business. And luckily for me and our staff and our board, we have ownership that doesn't just say it; they believe it. They understand that even in a winning season, you're only active for 162 games, or hopefully with playoffs and preseason 150, 160. You've got to have a legitimate connection in the schools and the neighborhoods, and that's where I feel like my personality has come through, as the first full-time employee of the fund. And, that a lot of the fund, I mean, look, the younger staff now, they can do the job a lot more efficiently than I can, but I still think that there is a cultural piece that I think I'm, a part of developing here that has been very inclusive, very open, very available, very positive, very genuine. There are very few neighborhoods in Cincinnati where we haven't, supported a team, renovated a field, gotten to know a municipality. Very few markets throughout our region that we haven't had some ability to meet people and build those relationships. So I think the Reds realize that beyond, just the day-to-day baseball, softball education work of the fund, is some of those glue elements that, that have really been a big part of it. I see.
So my last question for you, Charlie, before I hand it off to Kyle, who's going to ask all these questions that have been dropping in. My last question would be, what types of opportunities might exist for students, whether it be IUPUI, whether it be Cincinnati, whether it be Indiana University, places like that? What types of opportunities exist at the Cincinnati Reds Community Fund?
Well, I'm gonna answer that in 2 different forms. In general, the opportunities with us are plentiful. Not just with the community fund, but the Reds have a terrific structure for internships, and the community fund's a big piece of that. So our youth academy, we may have 10 to 12 different interns that roll in depending on the time of year. For us, it's really, we have our fall and winter season and our spring and summer season. So it's either in the Reds MLB season, or for us, it's in really the heat of the academy indoor season. Typically we'd have 3 or 4, maybe 5 interns at any given time that help us, run our data, run our lobby, operate our programs, build a lot of our clinics. And then we have our ballpark staff that help us operate our 50-50 raffle, operate our Red Legs run, our Marty Brenneman Golf Classic, our, all of our different events and programs. So we are very intern reliant. And we're just one of a handful of departments with the Reds that are the same way. So I've always told people, if this is something you want to do and you raise your hand early enough, you'll find an internship with the Reds. I really haven't heard too many people say, boy, I tried this year and I tried again in the following year and I couldn't get in. I don't know that I've heard that one time. So just from a Reds standpoint, and it was this way with the Timberwolves too, when, I was so impressed with the quality of the interns when I arrived there with 2 years under my belt in Boston. A lot of my peers had just converted from interns to full-time. They might have been a year or 2 younger than me. And in my decade plus there, by the time I was done, a lot of, maybe 10 to 12 of those interns had risen the ladder to manager or beyond. Good people that knew that's something they wanted to do, were willing to put in the work, that had the maturity and the skill set to maximize the opportunity, and then we're on the way up. I see one of the questions is from, there's Jeffrey Osherwitz, who's
you had to know we all knew you were gonna drop Jeff in there.
But then there's also Luis Escalante, who I had the pleasure of meeting a handful of years ago, and one of his relatives, Kaylor Escalante, one of his cousins, is somebody who I just described. I mean, he was an intern with the Reds, and he made himself indispensable and was just a fabulous member of the Reds front office and very connected to the community fund. He was, from his staff, he was a part of our weekly meetings before he got an opportunity that he couldn't pass up with Major League Baseball. So he continues to climb the ladder. Kaylor Escalante, oh my goodness, what a, great job that he did. Interest in baseball family, father, real passionate baseball person, really fascinating backstory. And, so had that front office internship that allowed him to open doors. The tricky part about all this, Jeffrey, is it's, the pandemic right now, we've already lost 4,000 intern hours. Staff sizes are shrinking. I just heard within the last couple of days, we're probably not going to be able to bring seasonal staff back, maybe all of 21. So, typically on an opportunity to speak to a class or a college or university like this one today, I'd be telling you, hey, here's my email address, cfrank@reds.com. If you're interested in the Reds, it's really not so much a matter of if you want it, work for it, you'll get it. But that's, again, when the clock starts ticking. If you want the internship, they're there, you can get them. It's, sadly, it's, we had people that were lined up for internships this fall that had paid their dues, that had done some work with us at home games, and, they were ready to start. And then the pandemic hit and they lost the 2020 season. And I stay in touch with some of them. I feel so badly for them, because a lot of them now are neutral, or a lot of them have had to jump into other industries and couldn't follow their passion. It's going to change. It's going to happen, now with more of a federal response, thank goodness. Now with, with the vaccine rollout, and, I think we're going to see as we get into the warmer months that, we're going to be ready for school to return in the fall. And hopefully by 22, we're going to be back, for the businesses that have been able to stay on their feet to bringing back the interns and the seasonal help. You all are just going to have to hang in there because, answering questions now, it's, part A is, well, this is how it typically works. And part B is, well, you got to hang on for a little while longer until we get through this.
So now I'm going to hand it off to Kyle. Kyle's going to ask the questions. They've dropped in a series of places. So I'm going to let him take control. And Kyle, it's all yours.
Well, thanks for that. I'm going to start off with the YouTube questions here that we have. And one's kind of looking back to when you were managing back, I think it was in Minnesota with, a team of people that were older than you. How did you gain the respect from them as a younger, manager of them and whatnot with that position?
I think, again, it goes back to humility. It goes back to trying to disarm people, with honesty. The easiest part of that is just getting up and walking down the hall or making a phone call. There are so many human conversations, whether they're in person or whether they're on the phone, that just aren't appropriate for email, aren't appropriate for text messages. So, some of that's common sense. I think the other part of this is just making yourself vulnerable. If I would have walked into somebody's office who was twice my age, maybe that situation, even close to 3 times my age, and if I would have been arrogant, if I would have been disingenuous, that gentleman didn't need me. He had a long career, a distinguished career. He would have tuned me right out. And that individual that I'm thinking of, he was too classy, too gracious to pick a fight. But I think he was willing to collaborate because, when I sought him out, I wanted to talk with him, to get to know him better, to learn more about him, and to collaborate with him as opposed to forcing an agenda on him. And I think in being honest with him and admitting what I didn't know, I think people respond to that vulnerability, and that was my style. It's not for everybody, but I think if I was somebody half his age or a third his age, sending him an email, texting him, telling him I need this, I need that, making it very one way, that outcome would have been very different.
So looking back, the past 10 months with the pandemic, and obviously a lot of your work is done in the community and involving with people. What's been like your biggest struggle to overcome within the last 10 months?
Probably the same thing that it's been for so many people. It's a mental health issue. It's trying to keep it's trying to keep everybody upbeat. It's trying to balance being honest and being realistic with trying to keep morale up. And then trying to keep your own morale up. Everybody's situation is different. I'm somebody incredibly fortunate enough where I was able to maintain my job. My wife was able to maintain hers. We didn't have to, get into food lines, and, we didn't have to tap into unemployment benefits as many people that I know did. Some friends, some family, some coworkers that were furloughed or worse. But that doesn't mean it wasn't hard and that I was, wasn't, susceptible to anxiety or depression at times, maybe not clinical depression. So, I would say just maintaining that overall sense of mental health and balance and honesty amongst the staff, or amongst the family at home has been the toughest part. So yeah, and again, it's sometimes I feel guilty for the fact that, well, why am I down today? Why am I struggling today? I don't have to worry about where my food is coming from. I don't have to worry about being able to pay my mortgage. I don't have to worry about my kids being able to learn from home. We have room in our home. We have technology and bandwidth. It doesn't mean it's not hard, so I had to get over to the fact, I think for a while I was trying to convince myself that I'm sorry, you don't qualify for having bad days right now. You're too lucky. You have it you have it off too well. And yes, I'm lucky, but no, that doesn't mean that people aren't struggling. I have so many friends that we finally had this conversation. It's like, we are the lucky ones. Why are we struggling so much? And for me, I don't want to get into politics, but the rhetoric of the country, the response to the pandemic, so much of what played out over the last year especially was so hard for me to channel, made me so irrational and so emotional. It drove my kids crazy. So trying to balance all that, not say something stupid, not insult people, but channel the frustration that I was feeling. It was frustration that doesn't even begin to tell that story. But, so everybody's feeling it, whatever it is, everybody, no exception, was struggling this year. So part of it for me this year was just coming to grips with that. It's okay for me to really feel lousy on certain days or really feel overwhelmed or hopeless at times. It's okay. Figure out where I can reach out to. I didn't want my kids to see it, but I have plenty of friends that I could reach out to that could help talk me down and help, get me on to the next day.
So kind of on that same topic, how did you mentally overcome the challenge of being in limbo between jobs during that 2-year period between the Timberwolves and the Reds?
Yeah, boy. Well, first of all, I was lucky enough to be able to rely on a friend and a professional contact who had the type of style to bring me in and employ me, and at least on a part-time basis, keep me active, where I could still network. And so that was a big part of it. Otherwise I relied a lot on family and friends, and it wasn't something that I was very proud of. I had left a nice title and a good position in Minnesota, and I wanted those people to think that, that life was grand. It's like, people putting their best self out on social media. It was hard not feeling that way for a couple of years. And even starting with the Reds and knowing that, I had left an organization at a reasonably high level, and I was really getting on board in a very undeveloped one, and one that, comparatively was a low level. It wasn't just the first couple of years, before finding that community fund niche. And it reminded me of a couple other times in the career where I just kind of had to suck it up, and be patient, and, consciously and subconsciously have faith that, similar to that story I told about not necessarily knowing the 5-year plan, but having faith that I was going to be able to read the clues and land on my feet and make the best of it. So it was the ability to kind of stop and breathe and be patient, and just have faith that, the strengths that I feel about myself are ultimately going to be able to translate somewhere.
Got a couple more questions, and I'll pass you back to Dr. Sherman. This question is basically for somebody who's interested in community relations. What kind of resources, whether it be articles to read, courses to take in college, events to volunteer at, can they take advantage of to better understand / prepare to work in the community side of baseball?
I saw Luis's question about that, so thanks for asking. One of the things I love about community relations compared to other disciplines, whether it was broadcasting or, other disciplines that I've been exposed to throughout my career, is that there is no one path to community relations. There's, there may be some foundation classes you can take, and there's certainly, there are many layers of sports business and business in general that overlay very nicely. But I love the fact that community relations throughout MLB and other leagues is kind of a melting pot. You have a lot of history majors, you have a lot of political science majors, you have a lot of sports business majors. I think, more than anything with this field, it's just really staying on top of what's happening socially and culturally. So, beyond the class load, because I apologize, I'm not really answering that question. So much of it is sensitivity to what's happening in your community, what's happening in your environment. We just had 3 days of MLB community meetings over the last couple of weeks, and I always enjoy the difference, the different backgrounds. Some people, came from the United Way or from their community foundations or from these really high-level nonprofits, and they're these really high-level fundraisers. Others come from a corporate background. The Indians have someone who spent 20 years in corporate sales who they just moved over to help some of the fundraising with the Indians, and she's doing a great job. I think she feels liberated from the day-to-day corporate field, and I know their foundation staff is just blown away by some of the business ideas and the fundraising ideas that she has. So, I just love the diversity, not just socially and racially and culturally, but just career-wise, that populate these different community and foundation posts. Community relations really is more personality-based. It's really more event-based. That's what I've found with a lot of the community relations jobs. So, any courses, any content along those lines, I think would be valuable. Foundation, once you get into representing a public charity, then you do need to be either, very fluent in the tax law, fluent in the finance and economics, fluent, in the government related expectations, or you really need to make sure you're surrounding yourself with people that can help you along those lines. I'm lucky now. I've kind of, worked my way into a position where we have a lot of talented people around us that can handle that. But, foundation wise, if that is the interest, as opposed to more of the community relations and the events, there are plenty of nonprofit classes, plenty of tax law classes that are really good baselines. And, legally, I know a lot of people that started in law. The gentleman who's in my position for a long time with the Detroit Tigers, he is an attorney by trade, and it is such a valuable foundation for him to have, if you will. He is, boy, it helps him in so many ways where I'm going to need to take 2 or 3 more steps along the way. So love the question, Luis, and I would be happy to follow up more, but I think the ultimate answer is there is no one true direction to community relations other than kind of following your heart.
One more question, and then I'll pass you back to Dr. Sherman. When people think about sport management, obviously, most of the time they're not thinking about the community aspect of it. So what is one specific thing or 2 specific things that is more important than people realize to do in your position compared to another position that they may think of in this field?
I'm sorry, Kyle, could you ask that one more time?
Yeah. So Jeffrey asks, what is one or 2 specific things that is more important than people realize to do in your position compared to a position that they may typically think of when they think of sport management positions?
That's a great question. Every foundation, every team community relations arm is a bit different. I would say, it's sort of being the jack of all trades. It's being fluent in a lot of different languages. It's being able to, to follow along with the finance department and the accounting department and the general counsel and the corporate people and the ticketing people and the creative people. It's being fluent enough. We've developed a reputation with the community fund of being kind of the minor leagues for the Reds. We've had a lot of people that have come through our internship program that have then moved on to full-time status with us that move into other positions in the Reds organization. And, while I'd like to take some credit for building the culture, I think probably the biggest element there is that in the community fund, people wear so many hats. You are involved in sales and donor relations and marketing and programming and event marketing. And, we're a small staff, and the handful of interns that, that really stick with us. And, right now of 9 full-time, including Emily, 7 were former interns. So, and 1 played 10 years of pro ball, and I'm too old to have been an intern with the Reds. So, virtually everyone else on our full-time staff had been an intern with us. So I think the reason that we've had the ability to stick is because those that either come up and stay with us full-time or that move on to other situations within the Reds or within the business community, they've worn a lot of hats. They haven't just been a one discipline person with the Reds. They haven't just done, one thing in the marketing or promotions department. If you're with the community fund, you're going to be spinning in a lot of directions, and that's not for everybody. So, it's figuring out how to be fluent enough and, and when you don't know, listen. Am I going to be able to know everything that goes on legally? Heck no, absolutely not. Everything with accounting, everything with HR, everything with, whomever, ticket operations, no. But, I've been there long enough where hopefully I've paid enough attention where people realize that I'm going to be respectful of their time. And then I'm curious. I want to know more about what they can do and how we can work together. So I guess it's, just understanding you're going to, really need to be fluent in a lot of areas and really not just, being okay with collaborating, really embracing that collaborative spirit.
So I always allow you, the guest, to have the final parting shot here in the speaker series. So Charley, any advice, motivation, tips, anything you might be able to offer to the group in attendance, it's your floor. I'm just going to let you go.
Thank you, Dr. Sherman. I'll tell you, with or without the pandemic, hang in there. If this is something where your heart is, and when I was your age, this is where my heart was, this industry. I'm lucky I finished school when we weren't in a pandemic and where life wasn't as competitive in this field as it is today. So I was able to find my way. If this is something you're passionate about, stick with it. If that means that doors are closed now for another 6 to 9 to 12 to 15 months as we work through this, and you have to find other means, find them, but don't give up on this field if it's what you believe in, because the internships and the opportunities are there. You know, if you go to Teamwork Online and you start applying for full-time work without a foot in the door, without any internship experience, you're going to get turned away. You know, we open a job for a low entry-level position, we might get 300 to 400 applications that come in over a couple days. It's staggering. And when I go sorting through them, I can't get over how qualified people are. So you've got to do more than just apply for jobs when you finish. You've got to go experience. And we're lucky. We're in a field, we're getting that experience. You know, you don't have to get a master's degree. You don't. And a lot of people get their master's in sports management. Some of the people I work with have. I'm sure they got something out of it. When people ask me, would you do that? I wouldn't. I'd go start working. Get your undergraduate degree and go. And if you want to get your master's, but intern and go at the same time. Because, you know, when I look at resumes and I don't care what college somebody went to. I don't care if someone went to an Ivy League school. I don't care if someone went to Northwestern. I don't care if someone went to IUPUI. I care about them as an individual and how hard they've worked and how much time they put into, you know, getting to know their industry better. I want to see how hungry they are, and I want to see how humble they are. And I know it's harder now in a pandemic, but these opportunities are there. And I know from Dr. Sherman to Kyle to Jeff Osherwitz, give out my email address. If anybody on this call wants to talk further, I'm always happy to do that. cfrank@reds.com, because I'm such a believer in the fact that the opportunities are here. You just have to know how to knock, and you have to be ready. You know, don't go get that big internship if you feel like you're not ready for it. You know, my son was wanting to get an internship in journalism this summer and decided, you know what, I'm probably not going to be as ready after my freshman year as I will be after my sophomore, junior year. So I think I'm going to work somewhere else this summer. You know, it's not for everybody, but I think that's a good, solid plan for him. You know, I want to make sure he is also, and I think he'd nail an internship now, but, it's going to be a little bit easier as he gets older. But again, don't lose heart because of the pandemic. And if this is where you want to be, stick with it. Stick with it and find your way.
I always love the little snippets of advice at the end. I want to say thank you very much, Charley, for coming on here today. And I'm hoping that everybody got a lot out of this, because to be honest with you, I know I did. So I'm excited that we had you on. I'm looking forward to maybe getting down to Cincinnati when fans are allowed back in, hopefully in the coming months. I don't know. We'll see. But I wanted to just say thank you again. And the next speaker series, the SMC Virtual Speaker Series, it continues on as Patrick Talty, the Chief Operating Officer for the Indiana Sports Corporation, joins us on February 8th. That is a Monday, February 8th at 6 p.m. So get your first day of 13-week classes in, and then come join us and listen to Patrick as he talks about all the stuff that's happening here in Indianapolis over the next couple of months. Thank you one more time to Charley, and we look forward to seeing you again next time.